All right, ladies and gentlemen, for this presentation, we're going to take a look at the nervous system. So the nervous system is honestly one of the single most important systems in the body. And it is all about three real things. Controlling the body. So pretty much anything that your body does, from you, walking up and down the street to typing while you watch this video, or your, esophagus doing peristalsis, your heart beating, all of it's controlled by the nervous system. So the central purpose of the nervous system is to control the body. But controlling the body generally involves two sort of subsections. The first one is gathering information. So you're always sensing information from the world around you. And you take that information in a lot of ways. Some of it is like things that you're traditionally aware of, your eyes, your nose, your skin. Some of it is all kinds of other information processing that goes on with like your ability to sense heat and the changes in air pressure around you that you get as like feelings on your skin. Like there's a lot of different types of information you get. Now, the thing about this information is that when you get it, it must be processed. And then when it's processed, it causes you to respond to the information, which is when you interact with the environment. So the nervous system is, in many ways, one of the most advanced and complex things that goes on inside any living thing. And again, keep in mind, it's not just human beings that possess a nervous system. Ours is just among the most advanced. So immediately what I want to get into is the fact that your nervous system is divided into two sections. There is what we call the central nervous system, which you can see right here, which is the brain and the spinal cord. Now, it's the central nervous system because it is there that the majority of processing goes on, okay? So the central nervous system is basically what allows you to take that input, decide what to do with it, and then from there, create a response. Now, the other side of this equation is the rest of your nervous system, which is all the things you equate generally with nerves and neurons and sensory neurons. And that's what we call the peripheral nervous system. And it's the nervous system that extends to the outside of your body and then back in, and it's on the periphery. Now, your peripheral nervous system is responsible for all kinds of stuff. You can see down here, sensory input, motor output. It's what arouses you in terms of like getting you excited, raising your heartbeat, getting you nervous. It's also what calms you down, brings you back down from those things. Part of your nervous system communicates with your sensation organs and your voluntary muscles. Part of it converses with your involuntary muscles. So it itself is divided into several sections. But you're mostly concerned with the peripheral nervous system, which is basically what collects the information and does the output or communicates the output to the other part of your body. And the central nervous system, which is mostly a high-speed highway to your brain, so your brain can process that information and decide what to do with it. Next up, we want to talk about the two different main parts of the central nervous system. And so here you see the little sections. First off, I want to point out all these things in this box basically make up the brain. So the brain's got the cerebrum, which is the biggest, largest part of your brain. And that's actually what separates human beings from other animals, is the fact that your cerebrum is so big. When you look at brains going from the most advanced to the most primitive, the more primitive the brain gets, the smaller the cerebrum. All right. And you have to get real primitive for the cerebellum and the brainstem to also shrink. So the cerebrum is responsible for conscious and voluntary actions in the body. So whenever you think, you're extracting memories, you decide to do something, you have feelings, a lot of that starts in the cerebrum, okay? That's the main thing you think of when you think of brain. Now you also have the cerebellum. Now the cerebellum is in the back of your brain at the base, right? So it's at that little dent in where your neck meets your skull, or like up under there. And it is the second largest part of your brain, and that is responsible for your balance and your motion. Okay, that's why primitive organisms still have pretty decent sized cerebellums, because they tend to be pretty good at moving. Next up is the brain stem, which is what comes out of your spine and interacts with the cerebellum and the cerebrum. Your brain stem is responsible for most of your autonomic muscle function. So things like your heart beating and your stomach moving and your like anything that's a autonomic or involuntary muscle control comes from your brainstem. And what you find is that even organisms with the smallest brains still have a brainstem, because that is what controls your most primitive functions. Now, if you were to look up and under inside the cerebellum and if you basically where all three parts meet, the cerebellum, the cerebrum, and the brainstem, there's this little section underneath, and you find these two glands, and this is actually where your brain communicates with your endocrine system, which secretes chemical signals to your body. Okay, and these two glands are called the thalamus and the hypothalamus, okay? So they basically are how your brain and your body sort of communicate on a chemical level, all right? So they're responsible for secreting things like adrenaline and calming you down, and also they sometimes process internal body sensations like hunger, thirst, stuff like that. Now, the other piece of your central nervous system, so those four that we just went through are the brain. The next section up is the spinal cord. And the spinal cord is basically what links the brain and the body. All right, so all of the nerves in your body tend to run right into the spinal cord. And then the spinal cord is basically like a high-speed highway right into your brain, so that there is rapid communication between what information your body gets, your brain, and then what you want to do with that information. All right, so those are the central nervous system parts. Just real quick, a diagram of the brain. So you can see down here, this thing, the medulla, or is commonly known the medulla oblongata, that is actually your brain stem. All right, so that's what we're talking about there. You can see right here is your cerebellum. See, it's a pretty big chunk, and it's at the base of your brain. This is what's responsible for your movement, motion control. You can see in here, here's the thalamus, and here's the hypothalamus. And those, again, are just two glands that create a bridge between that nervous communication and chemical hormone-based communication between your body, and they also help process some internal body signals. And then you also have here the biggest part of your brain, which is responsible for the majority of what you think about when you think, and that's the cerebrum. And the cerebrum and the size of the cerebrum is what actually separates us from the majority of organisms. Ours is by far the most complex and capable in the animal kingdom. All right, so there's a, quick rough map of the brain. Now, the brain itself and the spinal cord are made of a certain type of cell that is known as a neuron. All right, now neurons are nerve cells. They are nervous tissue. And neurons tend to have a very special structure to them. You can see the basics of the cell. All right, here you got your nucleus, your cytoplasm. But you also notice that this cell doesn't really look like other cells. And there's basically a couple of key things here. So up here you have on the main cell body, you know it's this body because it's got the nucleus and the cytoplasm, this thing called the dendrite. And the dendrite is where a neuron receives signals. Okay. Now over here you have what's known as the axon terminal. All right, so that's the end of the axon, and that's where signals are sent. Okay. Now, the axon itself is this whole long structure, and that's where the neuron signal goes down. Now, many of your axons are actually surrounded by a special type of cell known as a Schwann cell. You see this right here. And that Schwann cell wraps around the axon, acting as a type of insulation that actually speeds up signaling. So what happens is a signal is received here at the dendrite, and it has to travel all the way to the axon. So what happens is it moves down the cell body, it gets to this axon where you have these Schwann cells, and it jumps. And that speeds it up because it doesn't have to move all the way down the body, it just jumps. And then it jumps again. 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 And then it travels along the axon until it gets to the terminal. The ability of it to jump is because of these Schwann cells, which make up what we call a myelin sheath. And then the little gaps here are called nodes of Ranvier. Great, love saying Ranvier. Nodes of Ranvier and Schwann cells are named after cellular biologists that were responsible for isolating these structures. The myelin sheath has to do with what we call the cell type itself. Okay, now there's actually three different types of neurons that we basically talk. Interneurons basically are the bridge from thing to thing to thing. All right, and they look kind of similar to this. The cell body might be a little more central. Sensory neurons look like this, but it's sort of the other way around, where the dendrites are more on the outside, so they receive information and process a signal down the axon to other cells. And then you also have motor neurons where their axon tends to interact with a muscle cell. And that's how muscles get their signal to contract. And then when that signal ends, they know to relax. All right. So 3 types of neurons: sensory, motor, and interneuron. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is what's known as a synapse. And a synapse is where 2 neurons meet. Okay, so right here you see this is the dendrite end, and then this section right here, which is actually what's known as the synapse, is where the axon terminal is. Okay? So what you see here is this thing where up here is where the myelin sheath ends. And so what's happened is the chemical signal has moved down the axon, and that signal has actually caused these to come with it. And these, which you can see are called synaptic vesicles, actually contain inside them chemicals called neurotransmitters. So as this nerve signal just flies down this nerve, it gets to the end of the synapse, the end of the axon at the synapse, and these neurotransmitters and these vesicles end up hitting the cell membrane here. And when they do that, they release all these little dots inside of them, and you can see they just sort of jump into this empty space. And then those dots get caught here in these receptors. And as those dots get caught in the receptors, they send a signal to the next nerve. And that's basically how nerves communicate. It's like on, off, on, off, on, off. And then what happens is different neurotransmitters activate different receptors, which can cause a slight change in the signal. And over billions of neurons, this adds up to allow you to have different thoughts, control different movement. And it allows the complexity of the jobs that your nervous system does. All right, those are the basics of the nervous system.